Our first panel is going to address DO-254 for hardware. So you know, RTCA just kicked off a new special committee, Special Committee 243, which is looking at the topic of DO-254, which was published in 2001, and seeing if updates are necessary. So I'd like to welcome Brenda Oker from the FAA, Ray Reynolds from Collins Aerospace, and Chris Cedar from ALPA. Chris, why don't you get us started today with a look at how does hardware look from the cockpit?
Good afternoon, and thank you, Brenda, for that introduction. My name is Chris Cedar. I am the chair of the Aircraft Design and Operations Group for the Airline Pilots Association within our air safety organization. Also a current pilot on the Airbus for United Airlines as well. So at ALPA, our motto is schedule with safety, with one of our underlying primary goals is we do look for one level of safety in everything we do. I don't think there's any disagreement that the system is under stress right now. We have a lot of new entrants into the system. We have a lot of new technologies coming into the system, and we are in a period where technology is quickly entering the industry. And one of the views that we have with DO-254 is that we do like to see this one level of safety, this update of DO-254 that is now about 25 years old, to incorporate some of these new technologies that we can use to increase safety. There's a lot of opportunities out there and a lot of things that we can use to help increase and make sure we keep enjoying this level of safety that we do have within the airspace system as it is. DO-254 and an update of it, we do see that as a new opportunity to re-level technology and how technology is certified and how we can use it within the aviation industry. We're seeing this in a broad range of subjects, everything from airworthiness of UAS to conversions of passenger aircraft to cargo. Just a quick story, I used to fly international cargo, and the operator that I flew for, we actually had a document called an occasional user's guide, where you would have to go in and look and see what hardware is installed and what operating capabilities that you had on the airplane before you would go out and actually fly the airplane. There's a lot of new capabilities out there that could be enabled by updating certification standards. Certif-IA is a good example of that, where we have the airport moving maps. Be a good opportunity to take care of some of the runway excursion and address some of the runway incursion events. Enhanced flight systems, broadband data to and from the airplanes, weather updates and graphics, and improve robustness for navigation systems, multi-source, multi-constellation, anti-spoofing. As we all know, spoofing and jamming within GPS navigation is a major issue that we are dealing with, not only internationally, but in the United States right now. And by updating DO-254, we should have the ability, or we do have the ability, to help bring in some of these technologies and make sure they are available to all of the operators and all of the new certifications that will come into the industry. For example, the improved airplane interfaces, the MICDO, served really well for 45 years, but is something better possible? I am an instructor on the Airbus, and it is one of the things that we really have to teach is how to use MICDO and box work, and making sure that that hardware is properly utilized by the pilots. But is there a better technology out there? And is there something else that we have the ability to use and to grab onto to make sure that, again, we do have that one level of safety, but we also have the best options and the best ability to improve safety in the industry. With that, I appreciate the time. I'd like to hand it on over to Brenda Oker with the FAA.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Brenda Oker. I'm with the FAA Policy and Standards Division, and I manage the Avionics Software and Components Unit, which is responsible for the policy related to airborne electronic hardware. I wanted to say thank you to Chris. I don't get a lot of opportunities to work directly with the airline operations side of things in my role, so it was good to hear kind of from a pilot's perspective on this. And I think we can all agree that we need to have a viable path forward for certification of new safety enhancing technology. I did want to start off with a quick overview of the Air 600 organization, since we have made some changes over the last couple of years. AIR is the designation for the FAA Aircraft Certification Service, and they're the ones that oversee design, production, and airworthiness for all U.S. civil products, as well as import of foreign products. Air 600, which is the blue box in the middle, is the Policy and Standards Division. They support aerospace safety by developing regulations, policy, and standards for the design, manufacturing, and airworthiness of aerospace products. And then I'm part of the Air 620 technical policy branch, which is made up of product policy advisors that provide a technical leadership across a broad product level, and subject matter experts, or SMEs, that cover a wide array of technical disciplines. As I mentioned before, I manage the avionics software and components unit, which is Air 626B. We're responsible, besides airborne electronic hardware, we also have software, AI and machine learning, the aircraft systems information security protection, so ASIP or cybersecurity, as well as HERF and lightning protection within my unit. I also wanted to point out the box for Air 640 and Air 645 in particular, which is our consensus standards management branch. They're the ones that facilitate the FAA participation in development, standards development organizations like RTCA, and they provide program support for the SMEs that are engaged in these standards activities. In the next couple of slides, I'm going to go over kind of how we recognize FAA standards and the FAA policy, and then talk about the FAA policy past, the present, and the future. So starting with a little look at the past here. DO-254 was originally published back in 2000, and then in 2005, the FAA finally issued AC 20-152, and in it, that's where we recognize DO-254 as an acceptable method of compliance for airborne electronic hardware development, but it limited the application to complex custom microcode components developed to A, B, and C. A few years later, FAA issued an order 8110.105 that provided some supplemental information that was included information about simple and complex hardware development, and that was based on some of our experiences with the use of DO-254 over the years. And at the same time, EASA was also publishing some guidance. They had a EASA CM that provided their perspective on things, and the problem was that the FAA guidance and the EASA guidance was not harmonized. And at the same time that this was all going on, we did have a group called the Certification Authority Software Team, which was made up of specialists from FAA, Transport Canada, ANAC, and some of the European authorities and EASA that were working on position papers to address some of the topics in 254 that were still not clear. And we used these position papers kind of to harmonize on topics, but they weren't used for policy for any of the authorities. Anything that we identified as a gap, even through these position papers, had to be addressed through an issue paper on a specific project. So kind of moving into the present, we had a significant, because we didn't have didn't have harmonized policy, we had this significant harmonization effort that began in 2016 and went through 2019. And we began by reviewing all of the FAA and EASA policy that was relative to DO-254 and how we addressed airborne electronic hardware. So we were looking at the AC and the order that the FAA had, as well as the EASA software CM and the CAS papers that were related. And we took a look at those to try to decide, you know, where do we need to make some updates, right? What are the safety risks, and where do we need to have some clarification of DO-254? And then we used that to develop a list of topics, and we worked together over several years to kind of come up with a harmonized AC and ANC. So that's resulted in AC 20-152A, which recognizes 254 as an acceptable means of compliance, but it provides some additional guidance and clarifications on specific topics. And then we also released 0072, which is a best practices AC, and it was used to complement the guidance material that's in the AC 20-152A. And these two ACs combined are technically equivalent to the EASA AMC 20-152A. By using this harmonized guidance now, we are in a position where we've reduced the need for any product-specific issue papers or CREs that we were issuing before, and it ensures that we have a mutual acceptance of compliance from FAA or EASA. So looking into the future, before the FAA begins working on any new standard or updating an existing standard, we're typically asked these three questions. What is it? What are we getting out of it? And how does it align with our strategy? This ensures that we're supporting the FAA aviation safety and aircraft certification strategic goals, priorities, and our executive direction, and that the policy has a viable path to issuance. Now that we have this harmonized AC and AMC that's been in use for a couple of years, it was time to start looking at updating DO-254. So I have been considering, these questions as we go along. So starting with what is it? Obviously, it's the updated guidance to address development assurance for AH, considering all the changes in technology that have happened in the past 20 or so years. The scope of the activity is going to be determined by this RTCA EuroK committee that Rebecca mentioned earlier. But my expectation is that the update will include the additional guidance and clarifications that we have already agreed to in the harmonized AC and AMC, and possibly refine that material based on our experiences with it over the last few years. And then consider some additional topics with justification. Model-based development for airborne electronic hardware, for example, is something that people have been asking about. So the committee needs to determine if that's within the scope of this activity. So what will we get out of it? I think as Chris pointed out earlier, we need to make sure that we're addressing all of the potential safety risks and new technology that may not be covered in the current standards or guidance. Fundamentally, it's the FAA's responsibility to ensure to proactively identify and mitigate the safety risks. This update would also give us an opportunity to provide some more practical approach for applicants that are using things like simple custom devices or COTS devices, or for circuit board assemblies. That's something that was incorporated into the supplemental guidance that was part of AC 20-152A. And finally, how does that align with our strategy? Well, we are able to incorporate the FAA safety continuum by focusing on development of complex custom devices used at a higher criticality, A and B, with fewer executives that are applicable to the DAL-C applications, and then it's not required for use for DAL-D right now. This also gives us an opportunity to streamline some of our guidance. We've been trying to write guidance that describes what the applicant needs to achieve, but be less prescriptive and how they achieve it, so that they have some flexibility for defining their own processes. Right now, the Joint Committee is working on an internal report that's going to define the scope of the changes and propose a strategy to update DO-254. And I'm looking forward to being part of that committee as we look forward to the future. So now I'm going to hand it over to Ray to talk about the proposed changes from a hardware developer's perspective. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Brenda. My name is Ray Reynolds. I'm with Collins Aerospace, where I am a TSO compliance representative for Airborne Electronic Hardware. I'm also an engineering unit member under the Collins ODA and a non-Boeing engineering unit member under the Boeing ODA. Why should we revise DO-254? Since the standard was published over 25 years ago, the AEH device technology available has really evolved. We're seeing increasing levels of complexity and higher degrees of integration. System on chip designs are becoming more popular, and with that comes a more mature availability of a variety of COTS IP to facilitate those highly integrated designs. Along with that, the processes and tools are evolving. The integrated development environments are evolving along with the devices to support system on chip development and integration. As Brenda mentioned, the guidance is maturing. We have, fairly recently released AC 2152 Rev A with additional objectives and guidance in support of DO 254. So since the original AC and the publication of DO 254, the guidance material has matured and should be considered for inclusion in the standard itself. Along with that is industry harmonization. Having a consolidated common point of reference for everyone to follow, a common standard, would be a good thing. As far as topics for consideration under the revision, requirements management, I think is important. We're starting to see more of a focus on multi-level requirements as the designs become more complex and more highly integrated. The idea of both top-down and bottom-up requirement approach and requirements captured at multiple levels, and amending or improving the guidance to support that concept. Also integration. Right now, DO 254 doesn't talk a lot about expected integration activities. With these advanced architecture considerations, we may want to consider some more guidance around integration activities, especially with the complexity of system on chip designs. COTS IP, as I mentioned, it's increasing in popularity and necessity as well to facilitate the large, highly complex designs. And along with the complexity comes advanced verification and the need to improve or have further discussion on advanced verification methods. Multi-tier approach, for example, to support the multi-level requirement concept. Looking at verification at different levels as the design comes together through the integration process. And with that, with the increasing complexity, we're seeing the need for more safety-specific analysis and emphasis on formal methods when the traditional approach of elemental analysis becomes more difficult to achieve. Service history is another area. We could maybe have some more discussion and more, in my mind, examples. I don't know that we need additional guidance on service history for design elements and development tools, but possibly similar in concept to the examples given for how to classify simple versus complex COTS. We could use some examples on how to leverage service history or design elements and development tools. And then model-based development. We're seeing more use of modeling, if not outright model-based development for AEH. And this topic, I think might still be maturing from an AEH perspective. It's maybe not in the same place that model-based development expectations are for software, for example, but possibly if we look at clarifying advanced verification methods and streamlining or simplifying the discussion on formal methods, it rolls into that discussion, at least some indicators of basic expectations. Okay, the approach, I would suggest managing the scope for a revision A. As was mentioned before, we should align with current mature guidance, support mature technology roadmaps and the current state of the art, and define a baseline and an endpoint for the exercise of developing Rev A. But also consider a roadmap and the idea that we may need or will likely need future revisions. So, the idea that there will be a Rev B, Rev C, et cetera, as additional guidance matures, evolving with the needs of industry and addressing future technology trends, things that are more over the horizon at this point. As far as priorities, maintain product integrity, safety, reliability, security, which wasn't really talked about before. From an AEH perspective, that is something that's evolving, from a system perspective, and will probably have implications for hardware architectures in the future. So we might want to consider how to think about security and commit to get it done. I just put the question mark around 3 years. This is a goal I heard in other meetings, other industry meetings. And I think controlling scope and adopting the concept of a roadmap may help get a revision done within a more aggressive time frame. And with that, I will turn it back over to my fellow panelists, Chris and Brenda.
Thank you all so much for that. Before we go to a question for me, I wanted to give Brenda and Chris, did you have anything you wanted to say about Ray's presentation or each other's?
Nothing I can think of.
So I did get a couple of questions in the chat that are very specific on what is going to be included in the update of DO 254. But of course, I would say we don't know that yet because we haven't written the internal paper. I know you all have experience on committees before, and sometimes RTCA standards, we hear that they take a long time. And I was wondering if you all could give your opinion on why it will take 3 years and why it's important, what drives that schedule. So I will start with Ray.
Yeah, I think it's heavily dependent on gaining a consensus among all the stakeholders. It is a big part of that, and also our availability to participate and coordinate and get everyone on the same page.
I do agree with that. Chris?
Yeah, no, I would definitely agree with Ray that it's the biggest thing is trying to gain the consensus among everyone. Everyone has a different point of view and ideas they bring in that we need to come to an agreement with that. In addition to a lot of the scheduling complaints, because we have a lot that we are all doing at the same time.
Yep, nobody that writes a standard full time. I just help committees write standards full time. Brenda, I know you have a slightly different perspective as the regulator, but you've done this a while. What do you think?
I think, yeah, certainly defining the scope, right, is important at the beginning before we start this, and committing to a timeline is going to be important. Our role is different because, it's an industry consensus standard, but we're trying to make sure that it's something that we can accept in a policy document later. But it takes time to build that consensus, I think is what we're all saying. So.
It certainly does, and we appreciate all the time each of you put into the committees. And all of our members. I'm looking forward to welcoming the group the last week of May. So I will see you again then. Thank you very much for your participation, both in this webinar and our committee work.